Shalom Aleichem. We are in Hilchot Talmud Torah. The Rabbeinu Agadol, Rabbeinu Moshe ben Maimun, Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, Perek Revi'i. Halacha Gimel or Beth, sharing that with you now. Omer Rabbeinu Rambam, Kesad Melamedim. How is the actual teaching of Torah done in the Bet Midrash? This is at least how things used to be done. Harav Yoshev Barosh. The Rav, the teacher, sits at the head or in front of the group. Talmidim lefano mukafim atara. Atara is like a crown, keter, and so therefore the Talmidim sit before him in a kind of circle, or not quite a complete circle, so that they can all see him. So that everyone will be able to see the Rav and to hear him. Does that mean that all of you now on the Zoom should organize yourselves in some form of semicircle? No, I don't think so. But this is how things were done once upon a time. V'lo yeshev harav al hakiseh v'talmidim ala karka. It should not be done in such a way that the Rav is seated on a chair of some kind and the Talmidim are sitting on the ground, which was quite common to sit on the ground, usually on mats of some kind. Ela o akol al ha'aras o akol al kisa'ot. This is an interesting point where we are not interested in creating too great a gap between the Rav and his Talmidim. In fact, we are aiming for a connection, a close connection, and a feeling of Hawaii's brotherhood, of solidarity, etc. Uvarishona, originally says Rambam, Haya Harav Yoshev, Talmidim Omadim. It used to be the case originally, and this is Rambam, he refers to what the Talmud relates regarding the practice up until the time of Rabban Gamliel Zaken. Uvarishona Haya Harav Yoshev Talmidim Omadim. The students would study Torah standing, Lichvod HaTorah. They would study and hear the Torah while standing, not sitting. Only the Rav would sit. That was the state. Umikodem Hurban Bayit Sheni, but sometime before Bayit Sheni, and we're talking up the generation of Rabban Gamliel Zaken, it began to be customary. Naharu hakol lelamed letalmidim vehem yoshevim. In other words, the Talmidim were allowed to sit. This is usually explained as having to do with hulsha sheyarada le'olam, that we are not as robust and resilient as our forefathers were. And if that was the case, then today, what are we to say today? We are today extremely pampered and spoiled, and yet many of us complain about all sorts of things. So you can only imagine that today you couldn't really get many people to stand for very long. And apparently this was already recognized almost 2,000 years ago. Rambam continues. That says now halacha dalet or gimel. Im haya harav melamed mipi latalmidim velamed. if he wishes to, if he's able to teach without the aid of a meturgaman, as we will see in a moment, a metargem, in other words, a person who stood next to him and had a loud, booming voice. Imagine that you have not one or two or 10 talmidim, but you have, for example, 300 talmidim, a large hall. They do not have microphones. So a metargem was necessary as a rule. Metargem had, as I say, a very loud voice. He was a Talmid Chachamim. He knew, he would understand what was being said to him by the Rav. The Rav would tell him, state the following halacha, the following Mishneh to the Talmidim, and he would do so. And then he would begin to explain, and that also would be repeated by the Metargem. But there does not have to be a Metargem. If the Rav is, if there are a few Talmidim, or his voice is strong enough, etc. Today, a Metargem really is not necessary, because we have, even in a situation when you have many people in a large area, we have the technology, we have microphones and loudspeakers and what have you. ואם היה מלמד על ידי מתרגם, המתרגם עומד בינו ובין התלמידים, והרב אומר למתרגם. So if there is a metargem being used, then he stands between the Rav and the Talmidim. The Rav speaks to the metargem mashmi' al Talmidim, and he states to all the Talmidim what was said by the Rav. וכשהן שואלים למתרגם, הוא שואל לרב, והרב משיב למתרגם, והמתרגם משיב לשואל. So it's always done in this fashion, from one to the other in a kind of relay. ולא יגביה הרב קולו יותר מכל המתרגם. The Rav should not speak in a voice louder than that of the metargem. ולא יגביה המתרגם קולו בעת ששואל את הרב יותר מכל הרב. Nor should the metargem raise his voice so that he is speaking louder than the Rav who will now answer him. הלכה ה' אין התורגמן רשאי לא לבחוף ולא להוסיף ולא לשנות. The Turgaman, this person who announces and makes the teaching audible to all, he is not permitted to change in any way that which he hears from the Rav, because as we all know, Torah is particularly sensitive to fine changes and nuances in language, right? Whether if we see in a Mishnah, if it says mafsikim, or whether it says mafsikim, there might be a reason for that. There might be a difference. If it says so and so does such and such, kol aminim or mikol aminim, that can make a big difference, as the Gemara itself points out frequently. So the metargem has to be very precise, which is why the metargem also was chosen very precisely. He was not chosen at random, just as you do not appoint shliach tzibur b'kalut da'ath, as unfortunately is often done nowadays. To be a shliach tzibur is a serious matter. The person has to have an audible voice. He has to be familiar with the tefillah. He has to, he must be able to pronounce the tefillah, the words, correctly. Similarly, a metargem who announces and teaches the Torah, what is more important than that, than being meduyak, than being precise, pronouncing the words correctly, not changing anything at all, and understanding you have to have some understanding to know what to do and how to do it. So the Metargem was not anybody. It was usually a Talmid, a senior Talmid, who had been studying with this Rav for a long time, who knew him well, who would understand exactly what he was saying. So the Rambam says again, Enam Turgaman, which is the Aramaic word for Methargem. Rambam uses them interchangeably. En Turgaman Rashai, lo lifharoth, v'lo lohosif, v'lo l'shanoth. This can be connected to what Hazal say, that a person is hayav to teach Torah exactly as he received it from his Rav. Hayav adam lishnoth letalmido kilashon rabo. The same, using exactly the same words as the Mishneh at the beginning of Masechet Eduyot mentions. So again, for the reason that it is almost certain that he received this halacha, this Mishneh, from his Rav in precisely these words, worded exactly in this way, and he must pass it on exactly as he received it. Otherwise, he may be introducing some change, some difference, some implied change of meaning, etc. This, of course, is referring to a time when the Torah Baal Peh was studied and taught Baal Peh. Today, this is not the case. However, I would say that yesh lanu dugmato, we have something. There is something to take note of, which is analogous. In other words, there is much to be said for when, for instance, studying a Mishnah to try to ascertain the correct nusach of the Mishnah as precisely as possible. This can be done by consulting the best sources available, certain Kitvei Yad, and looking into the Rishonim. We often can tell from what the Rishonim, like Rashi or Rambam or Tosafot, what have you, what they say in the Perushim. We can see what the Girasa in the Mishnah, shall we say, was, or in the Talmud. We should be aware of these things. The correct nusach, the correct Girasa of the text that we are learning is not insignificant. It's not of minor importance. There is frequently much to be learned from these differences. It's true, sometimes the differences are very slight. It's almost, by the way, it's quite rare to find a Mishnah where there is absolutely no change, no difference whatever between Kitvei Yad, the manuscripts, or early printings, or the Rishonim, and the way the Mishnah is printed before us. At least 50% of the time you will find some difference. Of those 50%, frequently, probably 80% of the time, the differences are linguistic, stylistic, do not have any significant impact on the meaning. But other times they do, even very minor differences, as I mentioned a moment ago. So there's what to be said for trying to be fully aware of the precise text, the ancient text, and sticking to that text. Amar harav laturgaman, kach amar li Rabbi, or kach amar li Abba Mari. If the Rav says to the Metargem, the person announcing what he is saying, this is what I was taught by my Rav, kach amar li Rabbi, or kach amar li Abba Mari, or this was taught to me by my father, my master, my father, Abba Mari, כשומר התורגמן הדברים לעם, אומרם בשם החכם. The Turgaman also states precisely what he heard from the Rav. He says, this is what was said by so-and-so, this Chacham, umazkir shemo Shella Avi Harav or Shella Rabo, and mentions the name of the Rav. He doesn't say Rabbi, as the Rav said. He doesn't say Abba Mari. He says, this is what was taught by Chacham Ploni, by this particular Chacham. And therefore he says, V'omer kach amar Rabbana Ploni. So said our teacher, Rabbana, which is Aramaic, like Rabbenu, Rabbana Ploni. Afal pi shelo hizkir Chacham Shemo. So when it comes to this, the Metargem is not only allowed to, but he is required to mention the name of the Chacham, even though he is very, technically he is changing, he's departing from what he heard from the Rav. He's adding the name of the person. This he's supposed to do. She'asur lo likros l'rabbo o la'aviu bishmo. The reason for this is because it is asur for the Chacham to mention his Rav or his father by name. So the Rav cannot say, thus said Rabbi Paloni, speaking about his Rav. He cannot call him by name. If it's his father, it's not only Kvodat Torah, it's also Kibud Av. So what does the Rav say? The Rav says, Kach amar li Rabbi, or Kach amar li Adoni Avi, or something like that. Or Mori or Rabbi, if he's speaking about his Rav. We see, for example, in the Torah, Sefer HaTurim Shel Rabbeinu Yaakov, Beno Shel Arosh, he always says, this was the opinion of Adoni Avi Harosh Zal. That is how Chachamim speak of their Rav or their, particularly if it's also their father, Kal Vachomer. Halacha, well, or Dalet, Harav Shalimed, V'lo Hevinu HaTalmidim. So what happens if the Talmidim did not understand what the Rav was trying to explain? Lo yichos alehem u'yirgaz. He should not become angry or short-tempered. Ela hozer v'shoneh hadavar afilu kama pa'amim. He should repeat what he said and explain even several times. Ad sheyavinu omek halacha, until they understand the matter. Omek halacha, in other words, they fully grasp what is being said and why it is being said. So clearly here we're not discussing just the shinun, not just conveying the language of the halacha of the Mishnah. We are talking also about the explanation, what we call today Talmud. That has to be understood. Ad sheyavinu omek halacha. V'chen lo yomar hatalmid hevanti v'hu lo hevin. A Talmid should not pretend that he understood, when in fact he did not. He should not mislead the Rav in this way. Ela hozer v'sho'el afilu kama pa'amim. And he should not be embarrassed. He should ask the question even several times. And if as a result of being asked the same question more than a few times, the Rav loses his temper, Yomar lo Rabbi Torahi. He should respond with great respect and say, Rabbi, this is Torah, and I'm trying to learn and understand, and I'm perhaps the fault is mine, but please explain to me again. This is what, of course, the Mishneh states, beginning of Masechet Avot, en ha-kapdan melamed. If a person is too short-tempered and too much of a kapdan, then he will not be a very successful teacher. People will not be able to bear his demeanor, his temper. The Talmidim will refrain from asking questions. and therefore in a kapdan melamed. Also, in a baishan lamed, if your person is embarrassed to ask, even at the risk of being laughed at by his other talmidim or what have you, then he won't know. He won't understand. So both of these things are required, and that's what Rambam now says. Lo yeh talmid bosh mehavero. This is halacha zayin or hey. Lo yeh talmid bosh mehavero shelo ledu mipa'am rishona או שנייה, והוא לא למד, אלא אחר כמה פעמים. The Talmid should not allow his embarrassment to cause him to not ask that which he did not understand. Rambam says, "Lo yeh hatamid bosh mehaverav shelo medu." You see, the word lamadu means not just to learn, but also means to understand. This is why the term Talmud means a complete understanding. And the translation of the term Talmud in Hebrew into Aramaic is Gemara. The word Gemara means the same thing. In Aramaic, Gemar is to learn so that it is understood, so that it is comprehended and internalized. He did not understand until it was explained a few times. He should not be too concerned about that. שאם נתבייש מדבר זה, נכנס ויוצא לבית המדרש, והוא אינו למד כלום. If he will allow this to determine his behavior, then he will, as Rambam says, נכנס ויוצא, he will come to the Beit Midrash, and he will leave the Beit Midrash כלעומת שבא, as he enters, so shall he leave without understanding. And that obviously is not how things should be. That should not happen. That should not be allowed to happen. לפיכך, and therefore, אמרו חכמים הראשונים, this is a term that Rambam often uses with regards to the Tanaim, and often even the earlier generations before the classic period of the Tanaim. In other words, the period of the Zugot, period of Hillel Shammai, and even before. And sometimes referring to the Tanaim like Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon. לפיכך אמרו חכמים הראשונים, אין הביישן למד, ולא הקפדן מלמד. So essentially what we have here, what we just read here in Mishneh Torah, is a perush on the Mishnah. במה דברים אמורים? When is this the case? בזמן שלא הבינו התלמידים את הדבר מפני עומקו, או מפני דעתם שהיא קצרה. In which situation do we say that the Rav is required not to be a kapdan, not to be impatient, and to repeat and explain again and again until it is understood? When the Talmidim are not following mipnei omko, because the matter is in fact complicated and deep, profound, and not very easy to understand, perhaps. Or mipnei da'atan shehi chesara, or perhaps the Talmidim are not the very sharpest pencils in the pencil case. In other words, they are slow to understand. אבל אם ניכר לרב שהם מתרשלים בדברי תורה ומתרפים עליהם, ולפיכך לא הבינו. If, however, it is clear to the Rav that the problem is not the difficulty of the matter being taught, nor their lack of understanding, but the fact that they are simply not really making the required effort. They are lazy. Shem mitrashlim b'divrei Torah, or mitrapim alehem. They're taking it easy. And therefore they're not focusing, they're not really trying as they should, and that's why they have not understood. Hayav lirgoz alehem. Then the Rabbi's hayav is required to display anger, ulachlimam bidvarim, and to rebuke them, even embarrass them, kedel lahaddadan, in order to literally to sharpen them. In other words, to jolt them into the recognition that this is not what is expected of them. This is not how Torah is learned, making a half-hearted effort. And with regards to this, the Chachamim said, Zorok mara b'talmidim. And Rambam explains this expression. Mara literally is something bitter or something harsh. So where necessary, it is correct for the Rav to communicate to them his displeasure and his criticism of their attitude, so that they should feel and they should perceive fully that they are being admonished, they are being rebuked, and that they are at fault. So where that is necessary, that is the correct thing to do. So you see from here that the idea that in a school, teaching and studying is something that should always be done in a manner where everybody is smiling and everyone is having a wonderful time, where there is no discipline and no expectation and no demand by the teachers, by the system, by the approach taken by the staff, etc., is such that there is no criticism, no rebuke where it is required, and that the Talmidim, the only kind of Talmid should be a Talmid who has a smile plastered over his face, rather than sometimes understand that he is not behaving correctly. That is a mistake. That is not true. Human beings, by nature, are lazy. That is a fact. Particularly with children or youngsters, it is often the case that they imagine they would rather be doing something else. And this has to be dealt with. This has to be faced squarely. If the Talmidim only hear praise and the Rav is like a good friend, and he never tells them and describes to them the reality and where they are going wrong, then he's not a good Rav. As it says also in the Talmud, with regards to the Chacham Shebayir, if you have a Chacham, you have a Rav in a town. If the Talmud says, if all the people in the town say that he's wonderful and they only speak good of him, that is not because he's a wonderful rabbi, a community rabbi. It's because he doesn't tell them off. And everyone is quite happy with him for that reason. His job really is to, where necessary, to criticize, to admonish, to teach, and explain that this is not how things are done. If he's seen only as Mr. Nice Guy, then there's a problem with him. The fact that the people prefer such a Rav, that's understandable. That is how there are quite a few communities in the world, Jewish communities that have fired a Rav who told them too much of the truth and was not happy to let things slide. And I know this for a fact. That does not mean that is how things should be. Therefore, Rambam says, "Lefichach halachat tayt. Lefichach en ra'ui larav linhog halut rosh b'fnei talmidim." And therefore, the Rav, as we said a moment ago, should not be one of the gang. Lo linhog halut rosh b'fnei talmidim. He should not behave with them. He should not, go out and have a good time with them. He should not participate in their when they get together to eat and drink or to laugh or joke around. Their attitude has to be one of ema or yirah. In other words, great respect and awe, and therefore he cannot be their friend in that sense. And thus they will take him seriously and learn as they should. That does not mean that there cannot be, or that there should not be a deep and profound connection between the Rav and the Talmid. That is possible and in fact is desirable. That is often the case when you have a certain kind of Rav and he has the right kind of Talmid. A very special relationship can develop between them, and that is good and positive. But there still has to be this distance between them. Halacha well. I'm sorry. Yes, in some books halacha well, in others halacha yod. Here, and shoalim et harav. ייכנס לבית המדרש עד שתתיישב דעתו עליו. The Rav should not be, as it were, pounced upon or surprised with questions as soon as he enters the Bet Midrash. He should be given a chance to gather his thoughts. When a Talmid shoel, כשייכנס עד שישב וינוח. The same is true for the Talmid. You should not immediately begin asking questions or making a remark until he has sat down and his mind becomes more settled, and then the person tends to think before they open their mouth, rather than the other way around. وَإِن شَلِمْ شَنَائِمْ كَأَحَدْ. Nor should two Talmidim ask a question at the same time. In other words, there has to be a certain decorum in the Bet Midrash. وَإِن شَلِمْ إِذْ هَرَاv مِعْيَان أَحِرْ إِلَّا مِأُثُوْ عِيَّان شَهِمْ عُسَكِيمْ بُ. Nor should the Rav be asked a question on a totally separate matter, entirely unconnected to what they are studying at the moment. Because it may happen that the Rav, whose thoughts are completely focused on one matter now that he is trying to convey to them, will not immediately have the right answer, or will not be able to respond correctly. As I heard a certain Rav once ask such a question that should not have been asked at that moment, and he said to the Talmid, in his words were, "I'm not in the sugya right now." In other words, I would have to look at the sugya again and recall and go through the sugya once again to have everything sit clear, have things clear in my mind and sit well, as it were, balev yityashev al halev, and then I can answer you. ויש לרב להטעות התלמידים בשאלותיו ובמעשים שעושה בפניהם. And it is mutar, and this was done, as we see in the Talmud, not infrequently, that the Rav would deliberately ask questions. L'hat'oth ha-talmidim. L'hat'oth means literally to confuse them, to test them, to see if they really understood, and if therefore if you throw them a what's called in American baseball a curveball, to see how they will deal with it. And also to do something, perhaps, to act in a way which is likely to raise eyebrows, to see what they will say and how they will interpret it. He can also in this way test to see whether they recall what they were taught a week ago, a month ago, a year ago, or not. ואין צריך לומר שיש לו רשות לשאול אותם בעניין אחר שאינם עוסקים בו, כדי לזרזן. And he, on the other hand, they should not surprise him with questions from another matter, but he can ask them all kinds of questions to keep them on their toes. כדי לזרזן. אין שואלים מעומד or מעומד. This is halacha yud aleph or zayin. The Talmid should not ask literally whilst standing. When meshivim me'omed, no or me'omad, nor should the Rav answer in that situation. Apparently, the meaning here is similar to what the famous ma'aseh with Shammai, with the ger, who said, "Lamudeni kora Torah kula kasher ani omed al regel achat." Whilst teach me everything whilst I'm standing on one leg. In other words, in a sentence. And Mori Rav Gafech Zatzal explains here that this possibly is referring to a meeting or a situation where, not in the Bet Midrash, where you imagine people will be miushar, because we just said a moment before that the Rav should not be asked questions. He shouldn't begin teaching until he enters and sits down and takes a few breaths and settles his mind. And the same is true of the Talmidim. They should not immediately begin saying or asking things. And we also said that it became the common practice to study Torah while sitting. So why are we speaking here about standing? So this is in some other kind of situation where, let's say, the Talmid happens to meet the Rav in the street or at a wedding or something, and he says, "Oh, wonderful! Here I can begin peppering the Rav with questions." That's not the right place, perhaps, for questions, because again, the Rav's mind may not be completely focused. Here the intention seems to be that the question should not be asked, shouting from a distance, or standing in a place where the Talmidim do not normally stand. The essential idea is it's not mechubad, it's not zelo kavod la Torah. It's not considered proper, correct attitude and showing proper respect to the Torah itself and to the Rav to behave in such a way. So I think things have to be done in a organized, settled, and calm situation and circumstance, not on the fly. Torah is not to be studied on the fly. وإن شعلم الهراب إلى بعيان وإن شعلم إلى ميراء ולא ישאל בעניין יותר משלוש הלכות. The Talmid rather should not ask the Rav ela ba'inyan. In other words, ask questions to do with the matter at hand. You shouldn't ask all of a sudden from a different area, a different matter, subject matter in the Torah altogether. وَإِن شَارِمْ ela miyirah. In other words, the Talmid should ask. He should ask in a respectful manner, which indicates yirah and a proper attitude towards the Rav, not in a cheeky fashion. Nor should he pester the Rav with more than 3 questions at a time in one sitting. Really, what we're talking here about is a kind of decorum, and you could even call it good manners. Sometimes, just as the Rav must show respect, treat his Talmidim with respect, and certainly not, for example, to deride a Talmid who does not understand what's being said, and not embarrass him. The Talmidim also are required, Kal v'chomer, the Talmidim are required to behave in an appropriate manner towards the Rav. There should always, therefore, be decorum and no manner of hastiness or impatience or impropriety should be apparent in the discourse, in the interchange, in the exchange. Rambam says, "No halacha yodbeth or hayat shnaim sheshalu." Now, if there were 2 Talmidim who asked the Rav a question, sha'al echad ba'inyan, v'sha'al echad shelo ba'inyan. One behaved as we've been describing. His question has to do with what is being taught at this moment. The other decided, for whatever reason, not to do what we've been learning here, and asked a question which is from a totally different, relates to something very different. Nizkakim la'inyan. The Rav should turn his attention to he who is asking the question on the matter at hand, and he certainly comes first. If at all, the other one should be answered, certainly not first. Ma'aseh v'shelo ma'aseh. If 2 Talmidim ask a question, one is halacha ma'aseh, and the other is asking a question which is more hypothetical, v'shelo ma'aseh, nizkakim le'ma'aseh. Then the Rav should give reference to the question which is halacha ma'aseh. Halacha umidrash nizkakim lahalacha. The word halacha is essentially, as we've explained on other occasions, refers to what we would call today a Mishneh. And the Midrash refers to the way this halacha is derived from pasuk. So the Midrash here refers to Midrash halacha, and the halacha refers to statements in the Mishnah, which are halacha l'maaseh. So if one question has to do with halacha, has to do with a Mishnah, something which is halacha l'maaseh, and the other is more of a question of how do we know this, where did we learn this from, which is an important question. But if both of these questions are being asked right now, then nizkakim lahalacha. The halacha is the more immediate and the more important question in terms of priority. Midrash v'haggadah, if 2 questions are being asked, one with regards to Midrash, again, this means Midrash halacha. In other words, where is this halacha learned from? How is it learned from the pasuk? And Haggadah refers to Midrashay Haggadah. Nizkakim la Midrash, the Midrash comes before the Haggadah. So you definitely see here a hierarchy within the world of Torah. There is room and need for Midrash Haggadah, but it has to be understood that that which is Nogea, that which is connected to halakha al-ma'aseh, and understanding the halakha, where it came from, how it was derived, how it was defined, etc. That's halakha or midrash. That comes before Midrash Haggadah, what we call today Midrash Haggadah, what Rambam here refers to as Haggadah. Haggadah u'kal v'homer nizkakim lakal v'homer. Here we are referring to the study of Torah based on the Midoth Shehat-Torah Nidreshet Bahen, which was, in the past at least, a central part of the study of Torah, less so today for various reasons. So then if a question regarding Haggadah or Kal V'Homer, how does this Kal V'Homer work and why is it so? And perhaps we could deconstruct this Kal V'Homer. So then the Kal V'Homer comes first, because the Kal V'Homer has to do with an understanding of the halakha. Kal V'Homer, in fact, I should mention here that the original nusach and pronunciation was not Kal V'Homer, but Kol V'Homer. Kol with Kol V'Homer. This is how it appears in ancient Kitvei Yad manuscripts. Kol V'Homer u'gzera shawa nizkakim lakal V'Homer. If you ask why is that so, these are two midoth she'Torah nidreshet bahen. One, the Kol V'Homer, and the other Gezerah Shawa, comparing one situation to another, as opposed to Kol V'Homer, where the analogy is such that if it is the case in this situation, this is the halakha, it obviously must also apply to this other case, even more so. Why is Kol V'Homer, why does it have precedence over the Gezerah Shawa? Seems that this has to do with the fact that the Kol V'Homer is a more common and more often applicable midah. She'Torah nidreshet ba. It is more often used in halachic debate, and therefore it also has to be understood correctly. Because to apply a Kol V'Homer where it does not apply is, of course, a great mistake. So that which is of greater utility and come across more frequently in the study of Torah takes precedence. So we see from these statements that when studying Torah, there is also room for pragmatism and for prioritizing various types of limud and various types of questions. Yod Gimel. Hayu hashoalim ehad hacham ehad Talmid. If there are two people asking a question of the Rav, and in this shiur, in the amongst the Talmidim, there are different kinds of people. One is himself a Chacham, who is learning from this Chacham, and another is a Talmid, who is of a lower level in terms of his Torah knowledge and understanding. Is Kokim la-Chacham. Obviously, we first take the question and listen to the question of the Chacham. For two reasons, I think. A, because we pay Kabbalah Torah to show respect to the Chacham, and therefore give him right of way. Second of all, because his question is more likely to be a very clever, intelligent question, and more likely, therefore, to also increase the understanding and comprehension of everybody else witnessing and hearing this exchange. If a Talmid asks a question, and what we Talmid Chachamim, in other words, a student of the Chachamim, Wa'am ha'aretz, and someone who is not such a student of the Chachamim, but he happens to be present and he asks a question, Nizkakim la Talmid, we first take the question of the Talmid for the reason, I think, for the two reasons that we mentioned before. They apply here as well. If both of the people asking questions, Shenehem Hachamim, Shenehem Talmidim, Shenehem Amei Haaretz, Shalu Shenehem B'shtei Halachot or B'shtei She'elot. So if both people who are asking these questions are both Chachamim or both Talmidim, Talmidei Chachamim or Amei Haaretz, and or the questions being asked are equally relevant or equally irrelevant to the matter at hand, then Shnei Ma'asim, two different kinds of questions, but there's no reason to prioritize one over the other. Horeshut biyad hametargem ma'ata. Then the metargem has a certain, he's like the secretary of the Rav. He has the right to prioritize which question should be conveyed to the Rav and which question should be answered. The last halacha of this parak, Yod Daled Beth, and Yeshanim Beit HaMidrash. The Beit Midrash was a place where Torah was studied, and people spent many hours there, often. And sometimes people need to take a nap, or to eat or drink something. And Yeshanim Beit HaMidrash. The halacha is a Beit Midrash is not a dormitory. A Beit Midrash is not a hotel. It is not a place, therefore, for sleeping. So, mikavod Torah, mikavod Beit HaMidrash, a person should not sleep there. V'chol ha'mitnamnem b'Beit HaMidrash. If a person allows himself to doze in the Beit Midrash, chochmato na'aset chera'im. He will not succeed in his study of Torah, because this indicates a lack of seriousness. His approach towards the Torah is not as it should be. And his chokhmah will be literally in tatters. Kera'im. Kera is a tear. V'chen anar shalomo b'chokhmato. U'kra'im talbish numa. Numa is sleep, like tenuma. Sometimes the word appears with a taw, tenuma, sometimes numa. In other words, chokhmah and sleep do not go together. A person needs to sleep, but not the Beit Midrash. A person should not doze off and allow himself to have a nap in the Beit Midrash. When mesihin bebeit hamidrash ela b'divrei Torah bilevad. The Beit Midrash also should not be defiled or treated in a cavalier fashion, by way of the fact that people simply sit in the Beit Midrash and discuss ha'adah. In other words, all manner of things, politics and the economy or what have you. That is not that is not why we have a Beit Midrash, and that is not what should transpire in a Beit Midrash. If you want to discuss something else, then step outside. And of course, if you're in the Beit Midrash, really everything else should be put aside, and you should not be stepping outside. You should be remaining inside and studying. That is why you're there. And every person who behaves within the Beit Midrash in an improper manner is cheapening the atmosphere and the reality of the Beit Midrash, and therefore is also negatively impacting others. Even if a person in the Beit Midrash sneezes, we what we refer to in English as, bless you. You don't even say that in the Beit Midrash. Mishum bitul Torah. If you don't say bless you, don't say refuah to a person who sneezes, then you do not strike up a conversation on some other matter. And the kedusha, the level of kedusha of a Beit Midrash, hamura, is greater and higher than that of a Beit Knesset. Because Batei Midrash are for the study of Torah, and Batei Knesset are for the purpose of tefillah. You have to understand that in those days, these two types of place, these two buildings or venues were not interchangeable. In other words, Torah was studied in the Beit Midrash, not the Beit Knesset, generally. Today, they tend often a place. A Beit Knesset is also a Beit Midrash. A Beit Midrash is also a Beit Knesset. But once upon a time, a Beit Knesset was a place for the public, for the general public to gather for tefillah, not for the study of Torah. And the Beit Midrash was the place where Torah was studied. Anyone who wished to study Torah would go to the Beit Midrash. In this connection, I will mention another halacha, referring to what Rambam just said, that the kedusha of the Beit Midrash is greater than that of the Beit Knesset, and the reason is because the Beit Midrash is the place for studying Torah. I will share the source with you, and with this we will end for today. Rambam writes in Hilchot Tefillah, Perek Shishi, Halacha Hef. Mishneh, Rambam says here, in Hilchot Tefillah Perek Shishi Halacha Hef, Mishneh Osek B'Talmud Torah. The person was studying Torah, V'higia Zaman Tefillah, and the time now for Tefillah has arrived. Shall we say it is now time for Mincha. Posek u'mitpalel. He should stop his studies, daven, pray, and then return to his studies. Posek u'mitpalel. If, however, this person is someone who is constantly involved in the study of Torah, he doesn't take time off to work to make a living because, let's say, he doesn't need to. Let's say he inherited wealth from his father, or shall we say he has a business which he pays others to run for him and deal with various things, and he has the ability and the leisure to study Torah, and he doesn't take time off. So if a person is in that situation, and he does not take time off for other things, and doesn't, and now this person is studying Torah, and it is also now time to daven. Eno posek, he should not stop. Eno posek means that he will not daven at all. Shem miswat Talmud Torah, not just he shouldn't stop now, but he can daven. That's also very true. If he intends to stop at 5 and you can daven mincha till 6, then vadai he should daven after between 5 and 6. But if he's studying Torah and doesn't really want to stop studying Torah, he's not required to stop at all. This was the essential halacha, as stated in the Mishneh at the beginning of Masechet Shabbat. Mafsikim li kriyat shema, when mafsikim li tefillah. It says, so the en mafsikim means that he's not required to be a mafsik. He's not required to daven because Torah comes first. Shemiswat Talmud Torah gedola u'miswat tefillah, because the miswah of Talmud Torah is greater than the miswah of tefillah. This halakha, as I say, is mentioned in the Mishneh, the beginning of Masechet Shabbat. Mafsikim l'kriyat Shema. But for kriyat Shema, yes, the person has to stop and recite kriyat Shema with the brachot, and then return to his study. For tefillah, for Shemona Esrei, and keep in mind always that these are two separate mitzvot, even though people today tend to view them as one thing, but they're not. Then the halakha states there in the Mishnah, en mafsikim l'tefillah. The halakha was originally stated, as explained by both Talmudim, for people like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai v'chavero. In other words, people, as Rambam described here, who do not stop for anything. In that case, tefillah takes second place, and Torah comes first. But Rabbi Yochanan already states over there that in both Talmudim that this is true for people like Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, but not for people like me. So most people understand that if Rabbi Yochanan took the time off to daven, then we should do the same. But in principle, we see, just as the kedusha of the Beit Midrash is hamura, is greater than that of the Beit Knesset, so we see this another example, another expression of this hierarchy of mitzvot in the Torah, that Talmud Torah keneged kulam. So we shall stop here. Hiyu beruchim, hizku v'yames lavavchem kol hameyahalim l'Adonai.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.